Thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Taylor, Director of Public Programs here at the National Building Museum. We are our nation's museum to the built environment, established by an act of Congress in 1980. For more than 2 decades, the museum series Spotlight on Design has presented design luminaries in architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, and design. Spotlight on Design celebrates the philosophies and creative journeys of the voices that shape and characterize our built environment. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize and thank our wonderful program sponsors, the Anthony and Keiko Greenberg Foundation, as well as our passionate museum staff. We're so thrilled that today's Spotlight on Design is in the exhibition. This exhibition, Building Stories, is a one-of-a-kind exhibition that celebrates a child's first introduction to the built environment through children's books, and I hope you'll have the chance to explore the exhibition after the lecture. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Bonner, a principal architect of MAL. MAL is a practice that takes creative risks, references popular culture, and invents representation. Known for her work on sustainability driven by material innovations, including her signature material of mass timber, as well as panelized and precast tilt-up concrete systems, Jennifer's work emerges from radicalizing default construction logics to produce unexpected new forms and results. We're thrilled that Jennifer will share her projects featured in the Building Stories exhibition, as well as her work from her recently published book, Blank Speculations on SailT, co-edited with London-based structural engineer Hanif Kara, OBE of AKT II. Jennifer, it is my enormous pleasure to welcome you to the Building Museum.
It's really, truly an honor to be at the museum, because if I trace back at the very start of my architectural career as an undergraduate student at Auburn University's Rural Studio, there is a connection back to the National Building Museum that I'd like to make. This was a pavilion that I designed and constructed myself with 3 teammates. This is the Rural Studio that was started by Samuel Mockbee, who was really radical in the way that he set up an educational model at Auburn. And we built this pavilion for a community in rural West Alabama. And then just as we were finishing, the National Building Museum showed this show called Samuel Mockbee in the Rural Studio, Community Architecture. And so this is in 2004, so exactly 20 years ago. And just to know that our work in Alabama was exhibited in Washington, D.C., then and still today is just such an honor and very meaningful. The title of the talk is Candy, Dollhouses, and Blanks Everywhere, and it's really an abbreviated list of the many different topics that have begun to define the architectural project within my practice. And as I was kind of prepping for the talk, my file server system reminded me that this is the 78th talk that I've given in my career. And just to say that I'm very grateful that we're all here together in person in this intimate room, because at some point I gave a tour around just after Haus Gables was constructed, at many different institutions in person, and then I found myself sitting on Zoom for many other talks, and again, just to say, very happy to be here in person. I'm going to speak about mass timber construction, including Haus Gables, which is a single-family residence in Atlanta, and that was constructed in 2018. Blank House, which is currently underway in Portland, Oregon. And all these things kind of led to ideas about what I'm calling blanks in a book that was co-authored, as Diane said, with a British structural engineer, Hanif Kara. And hopefully, this book really sets out to inspire the discipline and the industry to rethink and reset the way we're using CLT in projects across the country. Blanks are also translated into a precast residential tower in Atlanta, but beyond blanks, it's really about candy and dollhouses, and also sandwiches and hats. But let's start with the name of my firm. What's a mall? Mall has partly something to do with being raised in North Alabama and the vast amount of time I spent in this mall in Huntsville. So yes, I mean a physical mall in this image, but also the roving acronym MALL, which stands for Mass Architectural Loop-de-Loops, or multiple angles and little lines, or maximum arches with limited liability. And when I'm wanting to sound more professional, I always add the C at the end, LLC. Sorry. So after teaching at 3 institutions across the country in Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Boston, keep in mind this is the context in which I built my practice for the past 13 years. The work was made with 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in practice. And this is the way that I survived the 2009 recession. So one thing I think you'll see is that's always been very interested in architecture that starts with a research question rather than a sketch. So here we are flying 4 drones around Haus Lange and Haus Esters in Krefeld, Germany. And we're scanning Mies van der Rohe's use of brick in these large picture windows. 2 drones weren't enough, so we needed 4 drones to kind of make a performance. And so the drones are flying in synchronization at the top of the brick coursing and scanning the rear facades. They're not twin houses, they're self-similar though. And the idea was to scan the bricks. Sorry, I don't know, it kind of crashed there. Which then we brought back into the studio and turned into a project, which I'll show in a moment. We often look to things outside the discipline of architecture, found in pop culture, like sandwiches, picnics, candy shops, and dollhouses. I'm interested in the ordinary, like artificial grass and stucco, and the everyday, like wedding photography, or everyday construction techniques, and how all of this material can become the starting point for an architectural project. Moll is interested in the project of representation, which I would argue is the only realm for the architect until she builds. It's a driving influence in all the work. And for me, a representational project is an architectural project. So this is another axon that snaps into view only from the top level of a Hard Rock Cafe located on Boston's Rose Kennedy Greenway. We have and so that's the top there of the Hard Rock Cafe parking lot. We have an affinity for fake and artificial materials. The kinds of materials that look like one thing but are meant to represent another thing. There is also an intentional link to art practice and the works of contemporary artists such as Barbara Kasten. Kasten's use of colored gel photography inspired a project titled Still Life, which became the driving force of an exhibition and publication at Harvard GSD. In my first year of teaching, I was tasked with being the faculty editor of a 400-page book, which ultimately became a demonstration project back to the school, asking students and faculty how might they use more color in each of their work. So I'm really excited that apparently there's changing color light as I'm going to be talking for the next 45 minutes. Other artists like Mary Corse's white light paintings, where she paints with highway reflective beads for works inside of a gallery. This became the logic for Mall's cladding system for a 55-foot long glowing brick facade in Atlanta. The work is admittedly graphic and uses techniques of redaction, similar to that of John Baldessari's big circle dots seen here, for 2 accessory dwelling units for the City of Los Angeles Standard Plan Program. Lean-to ADU and Big Circle ADU references all-American lean-to sheds, while also reinterprets 2 Los Angeles mainstays, the stucco box and the exaggerated false front. We draw inspiration from bungalows, constantly mixing the low and high, such as White House black trim. That's a trend right now in popular culture if you watch certain TV shows. And then there are basically 2 ways in which color appears in my work. First, it's through color blocking, and the second is through color gradients in equal doses of syrupy pinks and blues. And then lastly, I'm also drawn to innovative material systems like CLT and the way it has the potential to reset the discipline of architecture. And so I'm going to demonstrate in Haus Gables project its capacity for structural gymnastics, as well as the aesthetic implications for domestic and public interiors. So Best Sandwiches is one of the projects that's currently in the show. Sandwiches are ubiquitous in pop culture. Everyone's vying for the best Philly cheesesteak, best grilled cheese, best pastrami. And this is really the entry point for the project. I'm interested in all 3 versions of this. The first one is the cultural obsession. The second would be how people have made sandwiches in art practice, someone like Klaus Oldenburg's giant BLT or floor burger from the 1960s. And then third would be the desire to use the sandwich and its stacking system for architecture and to move beyond the metaphor. So the project questions the extruded floor plate and looks to stacking strategies that sandwiches have to offer the discipline of architecture. This was shot with a food photographer in Boston. So he had all the plates and stuff set up in his studio, and we put them on these platters. And it takes a certain amount of sandwich know-how to make an architectural stack. Color and glitter are important. Color in combination with different apertures. All of these things are kind of intentional. And the different apertures promotes the legibility of repeating layers. The sandwich stack offers us multiple grounds and multiple elevations. In architectural stacks, there's no longer a single ground upon which a unified figure sits. Instead, these buildings are stratified and they propose a multiplicity of grounds. And so if sandwiches is the entry point into an architecture, the idea is to make, several of them. There's models, they're drawn, and then they're exhibited. And then to the very next year is to take the idea and to make a speculative office tower. Now, this is pre-COVID in 2016. But the idea here is that we turn these conceptual ideas straight into architecture. And so here you can see the various kind of cladding systems and apertures that plays out in a curtain wall system, and then the kind of spatial links between 2 different levels within the stack. And then, always also not rendering it in pink, but rendering it in gray. Usually there's developers in the room, and this is when I'm trying to catch them, that it can be gray and kind of mundane if it needs to be. Okay, so domestic hats, again, is a representational project that leads into the Haus Gables project. So for this project, I started looking at the roof typologies of Atlanta. And there's a certain kind of lingo when you only look at the roof, right? You're talking about hips, ridges, dormers, valleys, soffits, gables, rakes, eaves, etc. These are the kind of typologies that architects are very familiar with: the gable roof, the mansard, the hip, the shed roof, etc. And then this is what we know in America. I would say that this, to me, is the American version of the cathedral, right? It's the contractor stockpile. There's a real craft and technique to building these multiplicity of roofs. And most of these roof pitches are 3 to 12, 7 to 12, 9 to 12. And just to note that all of the angles for roof pitches in Haus Gables are above 12 to 12. So I'm making steeper pitches than what's happening in stick frame construction. And then there's an idea here that most of those roofs, although are formally interesting on the exterior, most Americans live in buildings with flat ceilings, right? So what happens in the roof, stays in the roof. You don't get to experience that geometry. And that's the difference between creating a vented or unvented roof system. So I'm promoting, obviously, the diagram on the right. And so in this body of work, I'm really reading the various roofs found out in the wild. So this is what I would call a gabled roof covered by a hip. Figure 2 is intersected gables with offset shed flaps. Figure 3 is chamfered triple hips with asymmetrically extruded gables. Figure 4 is stacked, stretched, and clipped gables, or otherwise known as the gable stack. Most people are usually laughing at this point, but figure 5, front-facing gable with a camel-backed hip, plus a rotated gable bump in the back. So y'all are now all roof experts and know how to name these things. So we took a sample of 50 houses across the Atlanta metro area, and we were very interested in looking at houses in affluent neighborhoods called Buckhead. So that's object 21, and there's about 8 to 10 different roof typologies that are covering this single family house. But we're also interested in neighborhoods like Cabbagetown, where that's object 41, where there's just it's a singular shotgun house with an extruded gable. So we're cutting across socioeconomic neighborhoods and looking at, and we're interested in both of what that produces. So this is started as a representational project. I was called by the AIA of Atlanta and said that I just won an emerging architecture prize. And they said, congratulations, you get to exhibit your work. And I said, what work? So they gave me this massive space and was told that I could have an architecture exhibition inside. And so it was really looking at making work that would fill the room, and then thinking about the role of the massing model that we use in architecture schools and in our architecture offices. They're usually small things that sit on the desk. They have no detail. And so my idea was to blow those models up to these mega massing models that do not comfortably sit in a car or transport or on a conference room table. And most times, as one increases the scale of a massing model, you add more detail. In this case, I was interested in not adding detail, so no materiality, no windows, no aperture, but to really read the representation for what it is. And so there's a collection of 12 of these mega massing models. And you can see parts of the ordinary, parts of the original being expressed and are legible in the work. And then with a photographer in town, we then took these massing models back out into the yards, front yards of the houses that were originally scanned and studied, and dropped them off like yard art. And that year, Michelle Nunn was running for US Senate, and this became the postcard for the exhibition opening as we were trying to subconsciously promote her. She did not win that year. So that body of work is Domestic Hats, and it now transitions into Haus Gables. So there's an idea to build the model, the representational model at the 1-to-1 scale. And so all those things where I talked about hip roofs and dormers and eaves, the idea here was to select one that was only dealing with gables, right? So there's 3 pairs of 2, there's 6 gables crashing together in this project. And this is the kind of views of the elevation. And the thesis for the project is to think about the kind of organizational systems that architects have been using for a very long time, the free plan and the ROM plan. Into the paradigm or the diagram that I'm putting on the table for everyone might be the roof plan. So might we organize space based on the geometry of a roof rather than the 2 older systems that have been around a long time. This is the plans for Haus Gables. So the top plan is the first floor. The bottom is the the second floor plan. And I've drawn the ridge lines and the geometry onto the plan. And so you can see how the roof is making subdivisions and is projecting onto the space. In some cases, there is kind of an alignment to a corner. In other cases, it seemingly appears to be off. And this is where the project got really exciting for me, that there's an opportunity for roof rooms to kind of be nested inside of the larger section. So on this one, you can see there's a roof room that's nested within the space. This is one of my favorite views of the project that I just pointed to. And here you can see the kind of childlike image of house deep within the plan, and it is the bedroom. And I just wanted to point out kind of the structural gymnastics that's happening here. This is the view in which you can see how the structure is operating. I haven't talked about CLT yet, that's coming up, but basically the roof is acting like a folded plate. And then you can see how all the forces are transferred down the guardrail into what hits a steel beam in the first floor. So you can really see everything on display here. The thesis of the roof plan is that when building in small urban sites in the US and in-town neighborhoods, we're going to have less land. And so this house is 18 feet wide. And so the idea with the roof plan is that you can have more substantial sectional space and more dynamic living, if using the roof geometry. So as I mentioned, the lots are quite narrow here in Atlanta. The neighbors, there's 3-foot variances on both sides of the property. And so you're 6 feet away from the next house over. And then sorry, I forgot I was going to be pointing to stuff. Just behind here is something called the Atlanta Beltline, which I'm going to show you right here. The New York Times called it a glorified sidewalk and a path to transformation in Atlanta. Thank you very much, New York Times. But it's been a very transformative project for the city in a place that's hot and humid. The image on the right really shows what happens on a daily basis. Atlantans are now walking to and using the bike path constantly. It's been a huge success. And that's happening just behind the house. Okay, so here we go. This is the house being constructed. There's 87 unique panels of CLT. There's 3 installers and 1 person driving the crane. It was erected in 14 days' time. The wall panels are 3-ply CLT. The floor panels are 7-ply, and the roof panels are 5-ply. And we have an exact example of this material at the front of the exhibition that you will be able to see just after the talk. These panels, CLT was produced in Austria in a factory. Each were flip milled and custom cut. There were 4 engineers working on the project. This was the 3rd house in the country at the time built like this with this material. And what else could I say about it? Oh, and you see how tight we have a lay down yard on the left and we have the crane on the right. It's the only way the project could have gotten constructed. And here's a view to Atlanta skyline where John Portman was an architect and developer and invented the super atrium. So very exciting to be in a city alongside that invention and trying to make inventions myself on the roof plan. Yeah, here's CLT, just a quick kind of introduction. Imagine 2x4s laid in a direction, and then the next layer is turned opposite, and then the next layer is turned again 90 degrees. So this is an engineered, pre-engineered wood product that is now rivaling concrete and steel, and is really quickly being taken on within the construction industry across the country. Flip milled means that, you know, the panel is laid in a factory and it's cut on one side, all the miter cuts, and then it's flipped and more miter cuts are cut out. So this could only really, at the time of construction in 2017, be produced in Austria, who were already producing these panels for 30 years. There was no North American manufacturer at the time that was able to do both sets of geometries. All the panels were cut in a day and a half. Very exciting. This is how they arrived to site. We're dealing with 1/8 of an inch tolerance. Now this is also a finished product, right? So this is the inside of the house. It's structural and it's solid. And as they start piling up on site, you know, I was like, they're getting kind of banged around and beaten up, and I'll show what it looked like before we sanded them back down. So going through and figuring out all the details of how to connect 2 panels together got really complicated because I have interior roof conditions and exterior roof conditions with all different panel thicknesses. So this is a difficult geometric project that I think can only really happen with the kind of software and the way we're working in architecture at the moment. This is an erection sequence drawing that we work closely with the installer, the engineer, and our team to say, okay, panel number 1 is in the back, and this is where we're going to start. And the engineer is actually also drawing on the panel-to-panel connections and screws. So you can see this screw is going through 2 pieces at a corner. They're sometimes this long. I mean, sometimes I exaggerate. It's like the fish that you caught. But as we start moving up the house into the roof panels, you see the details get more populated and there's a lot more kind of going on. A lot of these drive angles had to be like pre-drilled on site before the installer erected it. So if there's 87 panels, we have 87 drawings with instructions. Imagine it's kind of like an IKEA drawing set. And so, you know, this is the day that the one-to-one model, dollhouse model starts to come together. It looks awfully thin and flimsy. It looks very much like a model you would make on your desk of these like flat pieces. And this is the view that I'm watching the project come together. I'm teaching at Harvard. This is happening in Atlanta. I couldn't be on site every day. But this is where I saw the crane dangling these panels, and some were quite big. And this is prior to this idea of thinking about the CLT blank, which I'll explain in just a minute. Again, the crane is on the right. The panels were shipped to the Port of Savannah. They were then trucked over on 11 hotshot trailers to get down the road of this kind of tight urban neighborhood. And you can see piles and piles of CLT kind of building up on the left side. So this is after day one, and it kind of felt like half the house had been built from this view. Again, this kind of heavy material, but also paper thin. It was a real spectacle. People just stood in the road, just kind of watching a crane put together a house that week. And this is the factory in which it was produced. I want you guys to remember this image of the CLT blank coming out of the factory. This is the image that the structural engineers sent me. They went to Austria to inspect the product before it was shipped. And this is where I thought, okay, here's an idea. They were shipped in these shipping containers, 3 of them. And then just to point out that the work, I think when working on the ordinary, things like this kind of happen, or they find themselves in the urban or neighborhood surroundings. That was not organized, that there would be a gable aligned directly on Haus Gables to the neighbor, but I think, you know, when you're working on the ordinary, these things kind of emerge. Okay, so then I brought a photographer in just after all the pieces were put together, and shot the house. So here I want you to look at like the brackets, the way you know, the product got, you know, it was only touched a couple of times, and how kind of in its raw state. Most of these brackets are hidden. I'll talk about that in just a second, but here you're starting to see how light reacts, and now you can start to see the space coming together. Oops. The photographs on the exterior are by an architectural photographer from Arkansas, Timothy Hersley. He shot all of the Rural Studios work for the past 30 years, and he had this idea of lighting the house because of these glass beads that I'll mention in a minute. And working with him over the course of 2 days to photograph the house, I was stunned when he produced this shot, because, you know, I'm spinning around the 3-dimensional model digitally. I'm checking all the CLT files. I think I checked it 8 times before we said yes to the manufacturer, and had never seen this view before. So something about the craft of an architectural photographer in the way that they see, you know, the work of the architect. And again, Haus Gables, you know, if you'll remember the image of domestic cats, there's a real interest here in trying to make the house look like a foam model, 1-to-1, in the urban context of the city. There's a lot of ideas in this project, maybe too many, some might say, but I would push back to say they're absolutely necessary. There was an interest in making it a house. As originally from Alabama, I was interested in like, what is Southern architecture? And so we looked to the Southern Institute of Faux Finishing in Brandon, Mississippi. I've actually never been there, but I'm dying to go. But this notion that Southerners had to kind of fake materiality, you know, so instead of a instead of a marble tub, it would be a porcelain tub with kind of a faux marble painting on it. Also, again, looking to Mary Corse's white light paintings. She's using something very ordinary. She's using the glass beads that are used by the Department of Transportation on highway striping. She's putting them on the painting and displaying them inside the gallery. So with my research students, we started to make our own kind of set of faux tools, a stamp, a roller, the glass beads, and we made a mock-up at the scale of 1:1 of these like faux finishes. This is the exterior material, which is to be a brick-like pattern. So when I started calling subcontractors in Atlanta, asking, telling them about my idea of faux finishes, one of the contractors said, "Oh, we've just done that around the corner on an Arby's." So I was like, okay, all this research at Harvard's kind of going nowhere. Turns out it is a product in the industry, which is pretty much like a sticker. So they stick on this template, and the last trowel of stucco on the third coat produces just, like an 1/8 of an inch of dimension to it, and then they peel the sticker off. So, but I would say what Arby's doesn't have that Haus Gables has are like a dash finish of these glass beads. So there we go. Here's the dollhouse. It's literally just behind us in the next room, which is so exciting. And the dollhouse is scaled at 1:12. This is a traditional dollhouse size. And the dollhouse became very instrumental for figuring out the faux finishes throughout the interior. So it's made out of birch veneer plywood. We were not interested in cutting it up to make the exact panels of the CLT house. That's happening live on the site at 1:1. Again, this is a representational model. So we cut a seam down the side wall and opened it up with brass hinges. And it truly is a dollhouse model. So all the materials on the right are the faux finishes. And what I mean by faux finish, there's a ceramic tile that looks like OSB board. There is kind of this veining of this pink tile that's very cartoonish. There's terrazzo. Terrazzo is usually installed in situ and ground into concrete. As you all know, there's now millions of terrazzo tiles. They're very thin, they're very fake in my opinion, and also different types of vinyls. On the exterior, as mentioned, the faux bricks are being used. So the logic for the faux finishes is to apply them to each room and to try to treat them like wainscoting. Right, so wainscoting goes up the walls. The idea is that each room has a different distinct material graphic and color. And so with a long view from the house, standing in the front bedroom, you're standing in a room that looks like concrete. It's really vinyl, looking through yellow and then black to the black terrazzo in the back. So there's this notion of color blocking that I also think is very popular in pop culture at the moment. So this is a 55-foot long view through the house. And then the wainscoting's also functional. So cables, wires, all the electricity is routed into the wall panels. And then you either plug that back with wood, or in this case, there was an idea to apply the faux finishes as like a sticker to cover. So in this room in particular, the faux finish becomes a backsplash for the kitchen counter, and then it kind of dies down to like 12 inches on the other side of the room to cover the electrical outlets. So it's these wedges of materials that are found in each room. Sometimes they align, sometimes they misalign. This is another view that got a lot of traction. A journalist came to Atlanta, and the first article that came out in Metropolis magazine was about the architect playing dollhouse and playing with the dollhouses, right? So most people would be offended, but that's precisely what I'm trying to do, right? So I'm dressing up in a pink dress and trying to create, the interior photographs are trying to mimic what it might feel like to be inside of a dollhouse. These photographs were by a photographer out of London called Naro, who worked with Zaha Hadid as an architect. And then after Zaha's passing, decided to photograph and not do architecture anymore. And she kind of nailed all the angles. I can't think of anybody else that would be able to kind of get all the angles that she was able to capture. There's a few kind of white spaces in the house, especially like this terrace. And then the garage is like super high gloss, reflective metal panels and a white floor so that it might conjure up more of an art gallery instead of a garage. And then the photographer kind of was moving these buckets around. I was like, what are you doing? She was like, well, they match your dress. Also kind of an omen, the roof leaked. So these are the buckets catching the water, I don't know. We solved the problem with the roof leakage, not a big deal. And this is, yeah, the conclusion of Haus Gables. So as I went around the country giving talks about the construction and the design, there'd always be a question, how much did it cost? You know, and the question is this viable? Can Americans stop building with stick frame construction and start building with solid pieces of wood? Of course, it was an experiment. Of course, it's more expensive. But I started to think about what if we produced 10 of them and we made a really compact, small lot urbanism. And we used the same pattern. All we did was mirror and flip its orientation. And this would greatly cut down on construction time. You could assemble several houses within a few weeks with 2 cranes positioned in the right spot. So I think with logistics and kind of having everything dialed in, there might be a way for this to pencil at the larger scale. Okay, so this gets us to the book that Diane mentioned, Blank Speculations on CLT. As mentioned, co-edited with Hanif Kara, the British structural engineer who worked on Haus Gables with me. This is what we're calling the blank. So no manufacturer had used that term before, but just to think about it in its material unit, it's that image that I pointed out in the manufacturer's factory, and to see this as a very large piece of an industrialized object, right? So if we think about plywood, those are 4 by 8 foot sheets. This is 9 foot by 50. We know they're this dimension because of truck transportation and getting them efficiently to site. And this became the basis of a studio that Hanif and I taught at Harvard, where we asked students, 14 students, to design 14 houses with the CLT blank and 14 towers. And so this was in the course of a semester, partly on Zoom due to the 2020 pandemic. But we really asked students to think about the blank as a material unit. And you can see half of the students decided to cut it up and kind of deny the reading of the blank, and half the students decided to show off its proportionality, and you can see it in the scaling of the system. So this is the book, this is an essay that I contributed to the book called Switcheroo, Blanks Everywhere, really arguing for, again, work in art practice, like Richard Serra's Blank from 1978, you know, this very abstract installation. And then again, thinking about the crane and this kind of earring dangling on construction sites. We asked contributors like Yasmin Vobis of Ultramodern to write an essay. Her essay, 10 Points on CLT Models, is really fantastic. I would argue her and her partner are one of the most exciting and experimental uses of CLT. This is the Chicago Horizon project. They take CLT panels and then they cross-laminate more panels on top to get these extreme cantilevers. It's really interesting in terms of the structural engineering and the design. We also asked architects like Sean Canty, who haven't built with CLT yet, what he might think is relevant for this material. We asked a historian of plywood to write an essay. She dug into the work of a female architect called Eleanor Raymond out of Massachusetts. Eleanor built these 2 houses in 1940. They predate Walter Gropius. Nobody's heard of her. As we know, this is how history gets written. And just wanted to point out that she had a very traditional client on the right who asked for these are plywood clad buildings. This was, the plywood industry was pushing this material. And the client said, well, can you cut down the plywood into these like, shingle sidings or siding boards? And then on the house on the left, with much more modern clients, she uses the 4x8 sheet in its expression of its material unit on the facade, so you can see the actual panelization. So I just think there's a link between plywood, its history, its use, and also to CLT and its industrialization. We also look to art practice, like someone like Lauren Halsey from LA, and how she cuts and carves messages and symbols and drawings into blank material. It's not wood, but it's these kind of plaster pavilions. This is at the Hammer. Or Jennifer Bolin Day's work, where she uses this kind of wood grain curtains, plywood curtains, and the notion of how the wood grain in the materiality could start to become a kind of new way of looking at the material. And then the graphic designer really took on cross-laminated timber as an organizational device for the book. So everything with the blue arrows, you have to physically turn the book. So on the end grain, you can see the different layers of the book as it stacks up. Using the students' work, we redrew all of the projects and rendered them such that the CLT blank is really on display. Exploded axons. This is what a timber tower would look like, exploded into all its parts and pieces. And then these kind of structural engineering analytics that was produced in London by AKT. This is a project that was kind of inspired by the horizontal wood siding that I mentioned before. So she's cutting down the CLT blank into these kind of shiplapped, and another student's using the material blank to make proportions on the tower. So that work happened in 2020 to 2022, and then I somehow convinced a developer in Atlanta to work on a 20-story tower, but he didn't want to use CLT blanks. He wanted to use precast concrete. So this is a 20-story tower on the Atlanta Beltline in a different neighborhood. And really the idea is to look at both form and the material unit. And here we go. Here, it's the same proportions, right? Because it's back to the truck and what is transportable in the US. So it's 9 foot by 50. I toured the precast yard, which was 30 minutes from the site, and I see these concrete blanks on site. And then I got really excited about the approved samples board over here, where all the different aggregates and colors and textures were stored. And so the project was really about how can we hack the precast structural load-bearing wall panel. It's also a floor panel, but how graphically that can start to make neighborhoods, identities, and challenge the kind of image of the tower. So you can see how the thinking is aligning to the CLT blank and how that's being kind of played out in the precast tower. And so the game was really about how many openings can you punch into these blanks, and they're also used for floor panels as well, and how that can kind of make the balconies protrude on the exterior. And so, now that I've kind of taught y'all about these roof typologies and also the blank, you can see how the blank is appearing graphically and kind of determining the form. You can cut shapes into them. You can cut wiggly edges at the bottom. And so this was very much about thinking about the communities of these kind of different chunks within the tower logic. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, 8 minutes. The next project is called 4 over None. So this has to do with something you're probably all familiar with and maybe don't know about it or haven't noticed it. Much of the kind of 6-story, 5-story, 7-story buildings that's multifamily residential right now in the country is created by combining two types within the code. So that's type 5 construction over type 1. So type 1 is non-combustible concrete or steel, type 5 is wood frame. This typology was created by Tim Smith in Los Angeles. This is the first known example of the 5 over 1, where you can see 5 layers, 5 levels of housing, which happens to be type 5, over 1 level of type 1 construction. And this is the kind of result that we're getting. This is America. I would say it's these words. I'm not going to say them out loud. Okay, I will say forgettable. And so here we're really saying, what about type 4 over none? Like, can we make a mass timber construction? And so this is really a developer pitch called Lemonade, where you can see the reading of the blank. We can cut shapes into it. And if you have 5 50-foot long panels, you now have a 200-foot long building, and that's 4 panels, and this can go pretty quickly. And so these are different examples of how to cut up the blanks. Some could be solid panels, and some could have shape and geometry to them, like in this image. And this is from the essay that I wrote, Blanks Everywhere, where I'm looking at Diller and Scafidio's Kinney Plywood House from 1981, where they're expressing the plywood material unit, and can we do the same thing with CLT? Okay, and this is the last project. This is Blank House. So if Haus Gables was about domestic hats, and it was about cutting up 87 cutting up blanks to produce the geometry of 87 unique panels, this house is like, what if we start with the blank? It's also about candy. Again, this idea of like many ideas informing the project. And so we're looking at, you know, kind of grandma's hard candy, candy canes, Reese's cups, yeah, all the different kinds. And ultimately, we ended up with this design, which kind of has a crinkle facade that I would say comes from like candy aesthetics. Everything that pops out of the house is kind of shiny and glossy. And then this house sits on a 20% slope site in Portland. This is the crinkle facade made of these CLT blanks with candy inside. These are the kind of details that we developed with the engineering team to produce these kind of crenellations. And the idea is that the blank is really kind of the exterior perimeter and also the kind of structural floor plan roof panels, and that they're all set on like a 7-foot, 4-inch width. And we can imagine, you know, elevations that kind of get put together and assembled much quicker. Windows are then punched inside of these 7-foot, 4-inch panels. And then the dollhouse in this case happened in two ways. We made these digital kind of renderings of dollhouse where we removed all the CLT blank panels and really started to think about the house in terms of these domestic scenes. So down here, this is like an office space that's really a table that becomes a floor, entry, a gym. There's a few leisure spaces upstairs. So the ground floor, the basement level is about 3 beds, 3 bedrooms. The main floor is about 3 tables, and the top floor is about 3 leisure spaces. So it's a pretty simple perimeter, but kind of intense interior. And you can see how like the architectural candy is being hung from the roof or popping through to the roof terrace. And the dollhouse in this project is also 1:12 scale. I promised I would speak about AI because that's on trend. The backdrop for this image was an AI image that I created of the Douglas fir tree in Oregon, printed out the size of this kind of drawing behind me, and had a food photographer come into the studio to shoot this image. You can see the hinges on the right there. And I think this is the photo. This is why y'all showed up today. And I wore the same shirt, so you would know it's me. And then lastly, just wanted to mention, recently quit teaching in academia to build practice and to build projects faster. Haus Gables was created in 2018. This is now 2024. These are my friends and partners, Christian Stainer out of Los Angeles and Jermaine Barnes. We are Barnes Architects, different spelling than Jermaine's name. And then we have a 4th partner called Dennis Chiesa of CH Studio in Fort Worth. And just last year, around this time, we were commissioned by an incredible organization in Fort Worth, Texas, called Transform 1012, who own this building, which was a former auditorium for the Ku Klux Klan from the 1920s. And we are inserting a new architecture inside of it and dismantling the kind of power structure that originally used this building. And our client is a coalition of 8 nonprofits, and that's currently on the board. So stay tuned, or to be continued. And this is some of our early ideas for how to engage that project. So thank you so much.